Entrepreneurial math equals maximum growth. Running your business is like running an obstacle course marathon, but most fall short because they treat it like a sprint or a walk in the park. They don't apply entrepreneurial math, and that's what will fix their problem.
This is The Rare Advisor, proud to be a part of the Advisor Advancement Network and home of a business model supercharged by recurring and repeatable events. Your host is Mike Walters, CEO of USA Financial. He is an investment advisor representative of and securities are offered through USA Financial Securities, member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor.
Entrepreneurial math can create maximum growth. See, running your business, it's kind of like running an obstacle course combined with a marathon. But most people fail because that's not what they treat it like. They treat it like it's a sprint. They treat it like it's a walk in the park. Whatever approach they take, they're not applying what's known as entrepreneurial math. Some people call it exponential math. And that's what will fix the problem. It will lead them to the end result that they're truly searching for to get growth out of their business. Now, this is one of the main reasons that I've embraced becoming such an avid data hound in my business career. I pore over the numbers. I collect data in every little nook and cranny and corner that I can out of USA Financial because I have learned that the more data you have, the higher your propensity of growth. Now, why would that be? Well, it's because people have found that anything that gets measured has a tendency to improve. Stop and think about that. Anything that gets measured has a general tendency to improve. That's pretty powerful. In fact, they even tell you that the first time you start measuring something, it will generally improve or rise by approximately 20% with no necessary additional effort. Now, why would that happen? Psychologically, consciously, subconsciously? I don't honestly know. I don't know if anybody really knows. But what happens is, for some unknown cosmic or spiritual or simply subconscious reason, you end up refining those procedures, refining those efforts, refining that push that you have behind that certain thing, and it will simply start to increase. So this really was put to the test and kind of proven to me by a gentleman who many, many years ago, this goes back, probably almost 2 decades ago, we used to serve in a CEO group together, and he ran some of the high-end pitching clinics and pitching camps that you could send a baseball prospect to. So he would take high schoolers and get them into college. He would take college athletes and get them into the minor leagues. He would take minor league athletes and get them into the pros. And he had many pitchers who were pitching at all of these various elite levels. And the one thing that he told me was that the most important secret he had at the time is the very first thing he would do when somebody came to one of his clinics, when he got one-on-one time with them, is he'd put them on the radar gun. And he said most of the kids, now this goes back in time a bit, but back then, hardly any of them had ever been on the radar before. And as soon as he put the radar gun on them, they would hone in their own skills because it gave them immediate feedback about what they did and how it improved their effort, or how it improved the result, I should say. So they realized that, oh, wow, when I felt that little snap at the end of my throw, I got an extra mile and a half out of that, and so on and so forth. And he said that would increase them of approximately 20%. His numbers matched, what they have said from a business psychology, business scientific standpoint, is that their numbers would increase by 20%. So how do I handle that? Well, USA Financial, I get a monthly packet. This happens to be the quarterly. This quarterly packet of information is all the different numbers and stats that our team assembles. Now, we've got most of this automated, so it's not like somebody's doing this for their full-time job. But I get 130 pages in this one pack alone once a quarter. The monthly version of that has 25 less pages. I still get 105 pages on a monthly basis. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because over time, so this is our actual trajectory line. This is our aggregate growth line right here. going from year 2000 through last quarter, through Q3 of 2021. And over that period of time, our average quarterly growth rate has been 5.1% per quarter, which equals 21.9% per year on average growth. That includes going through the financial crisis. That includes going through the pandemic, as you can see, as I have circled here. Now, how do you maintain almost 22% annual growth rate over more than 2 decades? You can't do it by just saying, let's push harder, let's run harder. It doesn't work that way. I have to get into the data. I have to be able to dig in and measure things. So let's walk through that for a second. Entrepreneurial math is going to help me identify every little nuance. And there's a ton of complexity in your practice. There's so many things that you're doing. If you start measuring them, they compound each other. They have an exponential interaction upon each other. So keep a very rudimentary example for us to go through. First thing you want to do is identify your average revenue per client. Simply get that number, calculate it out, look over a period of time in your books, figure out how many you brought on, what the revenue is, divide into that number and get an average revenue per client. Everything else I can build right off of that, right? So now let's say if you went to your staff or even yourself and you said, I want to see you increase by 20% next year. Would that be overwhelming? Or what if you said, I want to see you increase by 35% next year? Would that be overwhelming? In most cases, it probably would. Your staff might have a hard time accepting that. They wouldn't understand. But if you went to them and said, hey, I'd like to see a 5% improvement in this category. And I'd also like to see a 5% improvement in this category, and this category. So now let's go back to that example. If I know my average revenue per client, and now I increase the leads I generate in the next 12 months by 5%, and then I secure 5% more first appointments off of those leads. And then I earn my way into 5% more second appointments off of those first appointments. And then following that, I increase my closing ratio by 5% of whatever it is now. It doesn't even have to be by 5% total, just by 5% of whatever it is now. If I can do those 4 things, I just got a 21.5% overall increase. That's entrepreneurial math because they stack on top of each other. It's an exponential or a compounding effect. Now, let's say in addition to that, I was to generate 5% more in terms of introductions that I receive over the next 12 months. And I was able to up the minimum on that. I was able to up the overall average of the assets and the revenue I pull on each new client coming to the practice by 5%. So if I added just 2 more layers, now I'm at 34%, right there where I said. So suddenly getting to 34% doesn't seem that difficult because it's just 5% here, here, here. And these are all things that seem like they'd be pretty easy to probably hit. So all that's happened here is imagine if the crisis didn't exist and imagine if the pandemic didn't exist and what that number would be. It'd be significantly greater than 21.9%, be significantly greater than that 22%. So that's even averaging the really, really tough times into the equation. And I would argue it made those tough times a lot easier than they would have been had we not been measuring everything. So that is truly a golden nugget. It is something that you can bring tangibility into an intangible component of running your business. Start measuring everything. Even if you don't think it's important, if there's an easy way to measure it, start measuring it. The most important things, make a list of them and identify which things are key aspects and slice and dice it apart. You know, it doesn't have to be a whole project. It could be 4 or 5 different subcomponents within a project that will it will be able to have an overall better effect. The more things I can measure, the more impact I can have. I want to measure more, not less. So this is the opposite of the KISS system. Instead of keep it simple, stupid, here I want to track as many things as I can. Then I'll come back and I'll identify, hey, let's try to raise this, and this. And you might even be able to sit down with your staff and identify, hey, let's try to find a half a dozen different things in this huge list of items we made of all the different things we do in our practice. Let's try to find just a half a dozen of those that we could get a 5% increase on next year. And that's all they need to understand. The mind can absorb getting a 5% increase on a handful of items. The mind can't absorb getting a 34 or 35% increase in the next 12 months. It knows it can happen, the mind, it knows it can happen sometimes, but it doesn't feel like it can happen year in and year out. So how do you get there year in and year out? Measurement, measurement, measurement.
This information is for licensed financial professionals only and is not intended for use in soliciting sales from the public. The views expressed represent the opinions of the presenter or their featured guest, not necessarily those of USA Financial or its affiliated subsidiaries. Industry references are generic and not intended to represent actions or beliefs of any individual or entity. Content is only presented to illustrate general principles, beliefs, or ideas and should not be construed as legal or regulatory advice. Trademark and copyright protected. USA Financial and Affiliates.